None of us have anything to brag about in our relationship with God. The only thing we have to brag about is who Jesus is and what Jesus did for us, something we could not do for ourselves. I think the primary lesson we learn in Paul's conversion, if we put ourselves in his shoes, is that you can never be good enough to make God forgive you. Paul's life teaches us that no matter how hard we strive to follow the religious rules, no matter how hard we work to try and adhere to some high moral standard, our efforts, as good as they might be, always fall short of God's perfection, his perfect standard of righteousness. Paul drives this point home in his letter to the Romans in chapter 3, verse 23. He says, for everyone has sinned. Everyone. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. The Greek word used there for all fall short is a word that actually means to be left behind in a race and fail to reach the goal. It means to fall short of the end. In other words, picture it like this. You've trained as hard as you can possibly train. You get up every morning, you eat a very healthy breakfast, you put on the best running shoes money can buy, and you set out and you run your prescribed course every day, and you train and you train and train, and then you enter the big race. You've got the right gear, you've done everything you can do to prepare, and man, you launch out, and it looks like you're running great. Man, you got a good stride going, your breathing rate is good, hitting that runner's high, thinking, man, I got this. And yet, somewhere between there and the finish line, you fall short. You bail out, you quit. Something keeps you from making it to the finish line. No matter how fast you run, no matter how hard you try and press in, push through the cramps, whatever it is you're running up against, you never make it to the finish line. And this is what Paul is teaching us. No matter how hard you run, no matter how well you run, you'll never make it to the finish line in your own effort. You will always come up short. And we all experience this in our life. You know, at the age of 14, even then, I knew I had done some things that I shouldn't have done. And I didn't know to call them sin then. I just thought I was breaking the rules, right? But all of us have sinned. We all fall short of God's standard. Right before this, Paul makes it clear that no matter how hard we try, we can never earn our salvation from God through any merit of our own. Romans chapter 3, verses 21 through 22. Man, this is the gospel right here. This is the great news that God has shown us a way to be made right with him without keeping the requirements of the law, as was promised in the writings of Moses and the prophets long ago. Here's where the rubber meets the road right here, verse 22. We are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus. And this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who you are. Doesn't matter how good you think you are. Doesn't matter that you were brought up in a Christian home and was in church every Sunday. Doesn't matter that you've memorized 100 scriptures. Doesn't matter that you can defend every doctrine of the faith against false teaching. Doesn't matter that you go around knocking on doors, handing out tracts. Y'all showing my age right now. Y'all don't even know what tracts are, do you? Tuesday night, knocking on doors, unsolicited, trespassing, basically. Handing out a gospel tract that tells people you're a sinner and you're going to hell if you don't get right with Jesus. Doesn't matter how many worship songs you can sing. Doesn't matter how much you give, how many small groups you've led. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone that is made right with God is made right with God, not by their own effort, not by their own merit, not by their own religious living, but by placing their faith in Jesus Christ. Salvation is not something we achieve. It is something we receive. So continuing this racing, running analogy, salvation is Jesus running and winning the race and us getting the first place trophy. That's the gospel. That is salvation. We are saved from our sin and made right with God by placing our faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus did for us in his life, death, and resurrection. A truth the Bible makes clear over and over again, especially in places like Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 9. God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, because the truth is, even on your best day, even on my best day, I could never be good enough to earn the salvation that Jesus purchased for me by giving his life in my place. It's not a reward for the good things you've done. So none of us can boast about it. None of us have anything to brag about in our relationship with God. The only thing we have to brag about is who Jesus is and what Jesus did for us. Something we could not do for ourselves. You know, this is what separates Christianity from all other faiths or all other religions in the world. And I hate to use the word religion to explain Christianity because it's really not a religion. We'll talk about that in a second. But for the sake of conversation and comparing Christianity against any other religion that you would compare it to, every other world religion is a first-person religion. What do you mean by that, Pastor Jason? I'm glad you asked. Here's what I mean by that. By first-person religion, I mean that all of those religions are based on what I must do to reach God. It's all about me, first person. I've got to, you study them. Any other world religion, you study it. There is an assent you have to make, or a list of rules you have to adhere to, or a particular doctrine that you have to live by. You have to meet all these different standards, check all these certain boxes, and maybe then, it's not always a guarantee, but then the gods can accept you. Then you can be right with whoever that God is you're pursuing. Christianity is just the opposite. It is not a first-person religion. It is a third-person faith. It is all about what God did to reach me, not what I did to reach God. And what God did to reach me was send his perfect, sinless son to take on human flesh and to live his life just like I have to live mine. To put it in context of our series, Jesus put himself in my shoes, except he came and lived a perfect, sinless life and then freely sacrificed his life for me in my place. And God accepted his substitutionary sacrifice for me as a settlement for my sin debt. And that's what he did to reach you too. That is the gospel, the good news. You don't deserve it. You can never earn it. But God sent Jesus to purchase it for you and freely offers it to you if you'll only surrender your heart and receive by faith the salvation that Christ purchased for you. Salvation isn't about what we do. It's about what Christ has done for us on the cross. And when you place your faith in Jesus Christ and what God has done to reach you through Jesus, he forgives you of your sin and places you in right standing, right relationship with him. That is the good news this morning.